it's really indescribable to me to see these artifacts, to think where they came from, 2.5 miles down in the North Atlantic. I was actually fortunate enough to have dived on the wreck 6 times myself over 3 different expeditions, in 2000, and 2001, and 2005. And in 2000, we were actually recovering artifacts, and I was there present when some of the artifacts that are in this exhibition were brought up, and to see them again, in some cases for the first time after all this time, after 13 years, it's emotional. It brings back memories. I know it's a controversial subject, salvaging things from the Titanic, and those who are against it refer to it as salvaging, as in some cases as pirating, and I just couldn't disagree with this more. In my view, we're recovering history. We're saving history for future generations, and it's so vitally important to preserve and conserve these pieces of history, these pieces of really what has become the most famous ship in history, maybe arguing that Noah's Ark might be a little bit more legendary or more well-known than Titanic, but it certainly has become so incredibly popular in popular culture, and there's such a lesson there with Titanic, with the loss of Titanic, and it's so important that we remember her. When you see some of these pieces that have been brought up, and names, still attached to so many of them. Edgar Andrew, for example. I knew the survivor, Edwina Trout. She was 27, 28 years old when she was on Titanic traveling second class, and she lived in Hermosa Beach for years and years, and I live nearby in Redondo. And I knew her for a long time, met her in the 1970 or thereabouts, and she would always describe her table companions in second class, and she would go through the list of names that she could still remember of who sat at her table. And one of these people was Edgar Andrew. And so it makes me kind of emotional even to think about it. I wish so much that she were still with us. She died in 1984 at the age of 100. But for her to see these pieces, this towel with Edgar Andrew's name and sewn into it, is just incredibly moving. And of course, that's what's so important about this whole story. Of course, is the people. The ship was a wonder of naval architecture at the time, on its own, the largest ship, the largest moving object ever built by the hand of man, designed to be unsinkable, although it was never, officially advertised as such by the White Star Line. But the popular press took some insinuations to the effect that the ship was designed to be practically unsinkable, and ran with that, and the general perception became, even among the crew on board and certainly among the passengers, that the ship, we are on an unsinkable ship. And of course nothing is perfectly unsinkable. But so it's the loss of the ship and all of that craftsmanship and all of that artwork. I consider the carvings, the hand-carved oak and mahogany and so forth, to be artwork in itself. And there were oil paintings on board and so forth, but so much craftsmanship and technical engineering expertise that went into this latest and greatest, ship on the face of the earth. That's one thing. But then on the other side, you have the human side, and all of these trusting people who sailed on this largest ship in the world thinking it was unsinkable, and the last thing they ever expected was to have their voyage interrupted, and 2/3 of them to lose their lives in the icy North Atlantic in April of 1912. It's hard to even think about even today. It really is amazing to think of the preservation of some of these pieces. You would expect glass and bronze and so forth to survive. Salt water just doesn't affect those things. But we've learned with the exploration and the recovery of artifacts from Titanic that so many things survived that we didn't expect to, particularly if they're enclosed within leather of any sort, a leather valise, a suitcase, a leather pouch. The leather was tanned. The tannic acid in this material repelled the creatures down there. So anything contained within still closed suitcases or valises and so forth, paper goods, receipts, paper money, newspapers even, newspapers, and newspapers just turn to mulch, if water gets to them. But contained within this tanned leather, they were sort of cocooned and protected all these decades from the attack of the salt water and from being eaten by the creatures down there. And it is just remarkable. I mean, now we're looking at over a century since these things disappeared. We thought forever, and here we have them again. And it's just so impressive to walk through this exhibition and to be able to be so close to these things. The cases are contained, in the glass or the plexiglass, but you're able to come just within inches of these things and see them in detail and study them, and that's really thrilling to me. It's like going back in a time machine to just literally behold some of these paper items, the postcards written, and the ink is still perfectly legible from people back way, decades and decades before, email and all of this. And to see the way people lived back then, to read what they wrote on their postcards, to see the sheet music that they would learn on the piano and they would pass around, or they would actually carry with them on trips and pack in their suitcases, and to see what they were interested in at that time. Not to mention, of course, to see the fashions, the wardrobe that people wore, to see the hats that have come up, the leather hats, even top hats that have survived all these years, the shoes, shirts, entire suits of clothing. I remember in 2000 when I was out there on my first expedition, a suitcase was recovered, and standing right there and watching this opened for the first time by the conservator very carefully, and clothing still neatly folded inside, and you could see everything had not turned black. Some things had turned dark or brown or kind of brackish, but to still see the color of some of these things, shirts and pinstripes in pants and things like that, labels in the back of shirts and other clothing, still perfectly legible, again because it was preserved inside this a leather suitcase which had the tannic acid in the leather, and that just repelled all the sea creatures and just kept those contents basically hermetically sealed all this time. Seeing in this particular room here, particularly the D-deck door, I was this close to this set of doors on the port side of D-deck on 2 different expeditions, and looking right through these very windows, and seeing a little mini ROV or a bot, as we call them, inside exploring around, and I was outside in the Mir submersible looking through the window. And seeing the human presence inside the ship exploring while I was outside watching. It's such an ethereal, it's just so hard to describe, you just have to pinch yourself. I'm here, I'm 2.5 miles beneath the Atlantic. I'm looking through a door, through a window inside Titanic, and there's a human presence inside exploring, which can also look out through this window and see me outside in the submarine. And it's just mind-boggling. But being in this room here, which sort of simulates what it's like being on a dive, seeing the bench over there, the bronze end of a deck bench with all of its delicate filigree, I saw those on the bottom of the Atlantic. There are just so many of them down there still. One of the misconceptions, I have to say, is, and it's very prevalent, is that all of the good stuff has been recovered from Titanic's debris field. Oh, they've been down there so many times and they've just pirated and taken everything and they've cleaned it off. There's nothing left down there. They've ripped it all off. And nothing could be further from the truth. I speak from personal experience. again, 6 dives going down there. There is so much down there still. I would say just personally that only maybe 3%, 5% of the objects, even recognizable, interesting, important objects, have actually been recovered. There is so much still down there, so many areas where you don't see any sign of any submersibles ever having visited or ever been close. So it's quite a misguided theory to say that all the great stuff has been, brought up and Titanic's been raped. And it's just this. These are people who have an agenda against salvage, and it's just completely incorrect. One of the great benefits to these exhibitions put on by RMST and Premier is the fact that they're bringing history to life. If these exhibitions didn't exist, all that the youth of today would have would be books and TV documentaries. Be looking at 2-dimensional pictures in a book, turning a page. And to be able to come and have that tacit experience with the ship itself, with artifacts, with clothing, with the personal possessions that have been so carefully recovered and preserved and conserved, millions of dollars spent. This was not a haphazard thing that happened. This wasn't a careless thing. A lot of thought's gone on into it, and an awful lot of money to preserve these things for posterity. And it brings history to life. And for kids today, for the youth, this, I think, is so much more impactful and immediate to have this experience, to experience these artifacts in an environment like this, in an exhibition like this, than to look at pictures in a book or video in a documentary. I mean, this is the way to go.